Your hair type thinks you will be treated fairly?
The woman of color entered the courtroom with a calm demeanor and an expression of indifference, but before she could present her badge, she was pulled from the line and taken into a windowless room. No one asked for a name, no one checked her background, just laughter, insults, and the sound of clippers turning on as her hair was shaved off. For no reason. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just looked at them. Then she said 4 words. "You'll regret this." 30 minutes later, the whole room stood up. The man who had just held the clippers stood and saluted her by rank. "Your Honor." The sun had barely cleared the moss-draped trees when Amara LeRoux parked her rust-red sedan across from the courthouse on Liberty Street. The air in Savannah was already thick, the kind of southern heat that clung to your skin like memory. She killed the engine, sat for a second, and let the silence settle over her shoulders like a robe. She never wore the actual robe until she was behind the bench. It wasn't vanity, it was control, a reminder to herself and to everyone else that power didn't come from fabric, it came from presence. Today, presence would not be enough. She opened the door, stepped out in soft-soled heels and adjusted the collar of her cream blouse. The blazer hugged her frame. Her silver twists were pinned precisely at her crown, neat, deliberate, undeniable. She carried no purse, just a worn leather portfolio tucked under her arm and a badge clipped discreetly to the inner lining of her blazer. The courthouse loomed before her, old white stone, built by hands that never imagined a black woman walking through its front doors with authority. And yet here she was. Inside, the morning foot traffic buzzed. Clerks sipped burnt coffee from paper cups. Lawyers barked into cell phones. Security guards stood like statues by the X-ray belts. And near the entrance to the screening corridor, Deputy Blake Carver stood with his arms folded, scanning the line. He noticed her the moment she approached. Not because of who she was, but because of what she looked like. Carver shifted his weight, cracked his neck, and stepped forward. He was a big man, thick-necked, buzz-cut, with a veteran's posture and a civilian's smirk. His hand came up, palm open. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for heads to turn, "gonna need you to step out of line." Amara didn't flinch. "Is there an issue?" she asked. "You can't go through with that hair." He gestured vaguely toward her scalp. "Standard flag for concealment risk." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Those coils, they can hide, well, anything. I've seen it. Gotta follow protocol." "I'm a federal judge," she said calmly, "and I'm expected on the bench in 20 minutes. But her voice didn't matter. Her badge didn't matter. To Blake Carver, she didn't matter. He didn't even ask for ID. He just stepped closer and said with a smug kind of finality, "Not today. You're not. Come with me." Amara's jaw tightened, but she didn't resist. Not here, not now. She had learned long ago that survival wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, calculated. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one who didn't shout. Deputy Carver's grip closed around her upper arm, not enough to bruise, but enough to make a point. The hallway he led her down was dim and narrow, away from the buzz of the front lobby. Past the break room, past the bulletin board of outdated announcements and laminated HR posters about equity and inclusion. The irony didn't escape her. He opened a steel door with a code and it clicked shut behind them. A windowless room, one chair, one stainless steel table, a cart with a handheld metal detector, and on the edge of the table, resting like a threat, was a pair of black electric clippers. "I don't consent to this," Amara said, standing tall. "You have no legal cause." Carver cracked his knuckles and smirked. "You're acting suspicious. That's cause enough." She stared him down. "You're overstepping." He stepped closer. "You think that badge you flashed means something? Not in here." The air in the room felt colder than it should have, sterile, still. She heard the clippers before she saw him reach for them, the harsh mechanical buzz filling the silence like an accusation. The sound vibrated through her chest, her spine, her teeth. 2 more guards had entered the room, quiet, complicit. One flanked her right side, the other hovered near the door. Neither made eye contact. Carver raised the clippers. "Sit," he ordered. She didn't move. Her breath slowed. She could feel her heart pounding, but her voice was steady. "I will be filing a formal complaint." He laughed. "Oh, I bet you will." Then, without warning, he grabbed her shoulder and forced her into the chair. The other 2 moved fast, hands on her arms, pressing down. The pressure wasn't brutal, but it was undeniable, coordinated, practiced. The clippers met her scalp with a sudden jolt. One coil fell, then another, and another. Her hair, silver, soft, proud, collected on the floor in uneven clumps. Years of care, of culture, of identity, reduced to scattered pieces like ashes in a morgue. No one said a word. "She looks better already," one of the guards muttered. Carver smirked. "Shoulda come in here with some respect. Now you look more presentable." Amara's fingers curled into tight fists in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She didn't even blink. But inside something shifted. When they finished, Carver wiped his hand across her shoulder, as if brushing away crumbs. "You're free to go," he said mockingly, tossing her badge back onto the table. "Courtroom's that way." She rose slowly, straightened her blazer, picked up her badge with a hand that didn't tremble. She didn't thank them. She didn't look back. She walked out of the room and down the hallway like it was any other day. But it wasn't. Not for her. And soon, not for them. The polished tile floor beneath her heels echoed with each step. The temperature seemed to rise as she neared the courtroom, but it wasn't heat. It was fury, contained, controlled, directed. She passed 2 clerks who recognized her. They averted their eyes. One of them opened his mouth as if to speak, then looked away. The other just turned and walked off. Her robe was waiting in her chambers, folded neatly, a symbol, a weapon. But today, she didn't need the robe. Today, she was the robe. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, carved mahogany beneath fluorescent lights. From behind them, she could hear the low hum of conversation, attorneys, reporters, the clatter of pretrial preparation. The performance was about to begin. She pushed the doors open. The room stilled. Dozens of heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laptops paused mid-keystrokes. Eyes widened, and the realization spread like a ripple through still water. The woman who had just been humiliated in the hallway was not a defendant. She was not a witness. She was not a paralegal or an intern or a misdirected visitor. She was the judge. Amara LeRoux stepped forward, the buzz of the clippers still humming faintly in her memory. She moved past rows of suited men and silent observers, past the front row where the media hunched in anticipation. At the bench, her chair sat empty, waiting. She reached for the robe, didn't wait for assistance, slipped it over her shoulders one arm at a time. The fabric fell around her like steel, like memory, like thunder held still. She turned to the clerk. "Is the docket ready?" she asked, her voice even. The clerk, eyes wide, stammered, "Yes, Your Honor." Amara nodded once, then turned to face the courtroom. The room rose, even those who didn't want to. Even the man who had shaved her head. Deputy Carver stood frozen by the side door, as if he were suddenly very aware of the weight of his badge, as if the air had changed and he was the only one who couldn't breathe. She didn't look at him directly. Not yet. She took her seat, adjusted the microphone, tapped the gavel once. "This court is now in session." Amara sat motionless for a moment after calling the session to order. The bench, usually a place of performance and restraint, felt different beneath her. Not heavier, not colder, just more honest, She let her gaze travel slowly across the courtroom, from the rows of plaintiffs and attorneys to the gallery lined with media and silent onlookers. Some avoided her eyes, others stared too long, but no one spoke. Then she saw him. Deputy Blake Carver stood against the far wall, posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a man trying to disappear without moving. The blood had drained from his face, and the little color that remained pooled in his ears. He wasn't sneering anymore. Good, she thought. Let him feel something. Call the first witness, she said. The clerk's voice cracked, just barely. First witness for the prosecution, Officer Paul Whitmore. A tall man in a gray uniform stepped forward, clipboard in hand. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, stiff-backed. His shoes squeaked slightly on the tile. He took the stand, swore his oath, and sat down, still trying not to glance in her direction. The prosecutor, a young black woman named Kendra Holmes, approached the stand with practiced precision. Officer Whitmore, she began, you were present during the protest on East River Parkway on April 19th of last year? Yes, ma'am. You were under whose direct command? Lieutenant Daniels. And who approved the use of force during that incident? Lieutenant Daniels, again, with confirmation from courthouse security. Amara took a slow breath. Carver's name hadn't been mentioned, yet. Were there any injuries reported? Whitmore hesitated. Yes? What kind? Mostly bruises, some abrasions, a dislocated shoulder, I believe, and one protester with a neck fracture. Amara's pen tapped once against the bench. Officer Whitmore, she said, her voice cutting across the room. Was that protester a minor? Whitmore blinked. Yes, Your Honor. 17? Yeah. And unarmed? Yes. She leaned forward slightly. And yet your report listed his injury as consistent with self-inflicted trauma. Do you stand by that phrasing? Whitmore shifted in his chair. I was repeating what I was told. By whom? The post. Deputy Carver, he said finally. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Carver didn't move. Kendra resumed. Officer Whitmore, did you personally witness any excessive force during the incident? His jaw tightened. Yes. And did you report it? Another pause. No. Why not? He swallowed. Because it wouldn't have gone anywhere. Kendra stepped back. No further questions, Your Honor. Amara nodded. Step down. As Whitmore left the stand, Amara turned to the clerk. Next witness. The clerk adjusted their mic. The prosecution calls Officer Janine Keller. Officer Janine Keller approached the witness stand with the nervous energy of someone who had rehearsed truth but still feared it. She was white, mid-30s, and her uniform looked freshly pressed, as if she hoped the crispness might compensate for everything else. After the oath, she took her seat. Officer Keller, Prosecutor Holmes began, you were stationed at the Northeast checkpoint during the April protest? Yes, ma'am. And you were in the vicinity of Deputy Blake Carver during the incident? Yes. Did you witness his actions? Janine glanced toward Carver, then quickly looked away. Yes. Please describe what you saw. A long pause. Pulled a young man down by the back of his hoodie. Slammed him to the pavement, hard. The kid hit his face on the curb. I remember the sound. And what did Carver say when you reacted? Janine hesitated. He told me to toughen up, that protesters aren't civilians when they cross the line. Amara's fingers tightened slightly around her pen. Did you report what you saw? No, we're not. Janine exhaled. Because he's protected. Everyone knows it. The last officer who filed on him got transferred to a desk job in Valdosta. Holmes raised her eyebrows. So you remain silent out of fear? Yes. And does it trouble you now? Yes, Janine said, every day. No further questions. Amara looked down at her legal pad, then up at Keller. Officer, she said, Do you believe Deputy Carver's behavior reflects the values of this courthouse? Keller didn't hesitate this time. No, Your Honor. Thank you, Amara said. You may step down. As Keller exited the stand, the courtroom seemed to settle into a new kind of silence. Not the quiet of uncertainty, but of awakening. Even those who had come merely to observe now understood. This wasn't just a trial. This was excavation. Amara turned to her clerk. Next witness. The clerk hesitated, then read, "The prosecution calls Denise Ward." A few heads turned. Denise was not an officer. She was older, dressed plainly, glasses perched at the edge of her nose. She walked with a cane and dignity. Amara knew her name. The former clerk, the one who had quit suddenly 2 years ago. Denise took her seat and adjusted the mic slowly. "Miss Ward," Holmes said gently, "you worked in internal records for how long?" 14 years. And during that time, how many formal complaints crossed your desk regarding Deputy Carver? 12. Amara didn't blink. 12, Denise repeated. That's just the official ones. There were dozens more that never got that far. And what happened to them? Denise looked directly at Amara now. They disappeared. The room inhaled. I was told not to escalate, that the courthouse couldn't afford another scandal. I was told Carver had friends upstairs, that we needed men like him to maintain order. And who told you that? Denise paused, then said the name, Judge Vernon Hale. A gasp, not loud, but collective. Judge Hale, retired 6 months ago, a pillar of Savannah's legal legacy, the kind of name that got buildings renamed, streets carved, schools funded. Amara's spine straightened. Did you document any of these orders? Holmes asked. I did, but I couldn't keep them in the system, so I kept copies. Holmes turned to the court. We'd like to enter those into evidence. Amara nodded once. The bailiff, not Carver, took the envelope from Denise and passed it to the clerk. It was thick, sealed, heavy with history. Thank you, Monsieur Ward, Amara said. You've done more than enough. As Denise stepped down, she paused beside the bench. My granddaughter wants to be a lawyer, she whispered, just loud enough for Amara to hear. Today made that feel possible. Amara didn't speak. She just nodded once, then turned back to the room. A brief recess was called, but no one left. People stood, stretched, whispered, but they didn't leave. When Amara returned, the air felt different, denser, more certain. She tapped the gavel once. The court will hear one more witness this session, she said. Lieutenant Darius Flynn. A tall black man in his late 50s stood from the back row and walked slowly to the front. He wore a dark gray suit, no uniform, no medals, just a tired face and calm eyes. He took the stand, swore in, sat down. You've served in what capacity? Holmes asked. Former head of courthouse security, he replied. Served from 2005 to 2019. And in that time, what was your professional relationship with Deputy Carver? Darius tilted his head. I supervised him. Barely. Meaning? Meaning he answered to other people? People above my pay grade? People who made it clear he was untouchable? Did you witness misconduct? More times than I care to count. And did you report it? Darius nodded. To Judge Hale, to Judge Whitmore, to Internal Affairs, and Darius turned to Amara now. Nothing happened. Every time, the message was always the same. Carver's handling the rough edges. Like that excused it. A beat of silence. Then Amara asked, Lieutenant Flynn, in your opinion, is this courthouse operating with integrity? He shook his head slowly. No, Your Honor, not until now. By the time the session ended, the sun had shifted across the tall windows of the courtroom. Shadows stretched long over the marble floors. Amara stood. This court will reconvene tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. Everyone rose. Even Carver. He hadn't moved all day, but now he seemed visibly smaller, shrunken, like a man waiting for a shoe to drop. He didn't know the shoe was already in motion. As Amara stepped down from the bench, she walked past him. Their eyes met. He opened his mouth, but no words came. She didn't break stride. Outside, the first protest signs had appeared. Amara hadn't made it halfway back to her chambers when her clerk caught up with her, breathless. "Judge LeRoux, there's someone waiting in your office. Says he's with the DOJ. She stopped mid-stride. "What division?" "Office of Civil Rights." Amara exhaled through her nose. "Send him in." When she entered, a tall man in a gray suit stood by the window, back turned. He turned slowly, black, late 40s, quiet fire behind his eyes. He didn't offer a business card, just said, "Judge Monroe sent me, from D.C." That name carried weight, a federal circuit judge known for taking on impossible reform cases. "I saw the footage," he said calmly. "This is going to be bigger than Savannah. We're opening a review." "Of the courthouse?" He shook his head. "Of the district." She sat down behind her desk, folded her hands. "You'll get pushback." "Already am," he said. "The phone at the DOJ lit up 30 minutes after you took the bench. They're rattled." "Good." He took a small folder from his briefcase and placed it on her desk. "These are sealed depositions, old complaints, Carver, Hale, even some sitting judges. Stuff that was buried." Amara opened the folder. Names she knew, names she trusted. And then, a complaint. Dismissed, dated 2014, filed anonymously. She remembered that day. A whisper in the hallway, a comment about her body during a trial recess. She had told herself it wasn't worth making noise. Now it was sitting in front of her like a ghost. The man noticed her expression. "You weren't supposed to see that. But we figured you'd want everything." She nodded once. "Leave it." Outside, the protest had grown. What started as a handful of signs was now dozens of people, students, pastors, veterans, mothers. Some held signs with her name. Others just stood, quietly, a wall of presence. News vans lined the far curb. One camera crew was already broadcasting live from the courthouse lawn. Inside the courtroom, the next session began. Amara didn't smile, she didn't flinch, but when she tapped the gavel this time, the echo sounded different. Not judicial, foundational. As the session resumed, the courtroom was packed tighter than ever. Students sat on the floor between the aisles. A row of local pastors filled the back bench, hands folded, expressions unreadable. In the far corner, Amara noticed someone she hadn't seen in years. Reverend Elijah Dorsey, the man who used to run youth programs in Southside before budget cuts shut them down. Even he was here. And yet, as full as the courtroom was, it still felt like a vault about to crack. "Call your next witness," Amara said. Prosecutor Holmes stood. "The state calls Mr. Louis Bryant." A rustle swept through the gallery. An older black man, late 60s, stepped forward slowly. He wore a pressed white shirt and black slacks, but his gait was uneven. When he raised his right hand for the oath, his fingers trembled slightly. He took the stand, adjusted the mic, and looked straight ahead. "Mr. Bryant," Holmes said gently, "can you tell the court what happened on March 14th, 2011? Bryant nodded once. "My daughter had just lost her custody case. I got upset, said the system was broken, raised my voice." He paused. Didn't curse, didn't touch nobody, just stood near the defense table and said, "This ain't justice." And what happened next? His mouth went tight. "Deputy Carver slammed me against the wall, said I was threatening the court." Gasps, not soft ones. "And were you injured?" "2 cracked ribs. Shoulder dislocation. Took 6 months of therapy to raise my arm again." "Were charges filed against you?" "Yes, ma'am." "Disturbing the peace, resisting arrest." "And were you convicted?" No, Judd dropped it. And your injuries? They said I slipped. Amara leaned forward. Mr. Bryant, did you file a complaint? I did. And what happened to it? He looked at her now. They said there was no record. As the silence settled, Amara sat back in her chair. This court thanks you for your testimony, Mr. Bryant. He stood with effort. I never thought I'd speak it out loud again. You just did, she said, on the record. The next three witnesses told similar stories. One had been a teenage intern when Carver forced her to strip her bag at gunpoint because he said she walked suspicious. Another, a law school graduate, had been stopped at security 17 times in a single summer internship. She kept a log. Amara ordered that log submitted into evidence. The system was unraveling, and with every word spoken, the courtroom shifted from place of punishment to place of reckoning. That night, Amara didn't go home. She stayed in her office, lights off, watching live streams of the courthouse steps. The crowd had doubled. Some held candles, some held silence, some held each other. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, she answered. A voice on the other end. We're with you, keep going. Then silence. Then a second text, this time from a former prosecutor she used to clerk. They're going to try to remove you. Be ready. She already was. The next morning the courthouse was surrounded, not by protesters, by press. National anchors had flown in. There were microphones at every exit, long lenses at every window. Her name was on the banner beneath every headline. Federal judge faces her abuser, reshapes courthouse culture in real time. Inside, Amara called the next session to order. But before the prosecution could speak, a tall white man in a navy suit rose from the defense table. Your Honor, he said smoothly, we request a motion for recusal. Amara didn't blink. On what grounds? Your recent experiences call into question your ability to remain impartial. She stood slowly, walked to the edge of the bench. You're suggesting that because I was assaulted, I can't deliver justice? The man hesitated. I'm suggesting the perception. Amara raised a hand. Let me be clear, she said, her voice steady but rising. I did not ask to be assaulted. I did not ask to be made a symbol. But I will not recuse myself for surviving something this courthouse allowed to happen. A murmur of support rose behind the bar. She continued. If justice falters in the face of discomfort, then it was never justice to begin with. Then, looking the defense attorney directly in the eyes, motion denied. Sit down. As the session continued, a young woman raised her hand in the back row. Amara looked to the clerk. The clerk nodded. Permission granted. The woman stood, nervous but determined. My name is Rebecca Ellis. I used to clean this courthouse at night. I saw Deputy Carver take people into that room. I didn't know what happened, but I knew it was bad. Thank you, Amara said. Would you be willing to speak on record? Rebecca nodded. I already wrote a statement. It's signed. And I gave it to your clerk this morning. The court accepted it. By noon, Amara had signed 5 judicial review requests and issued subpoenas to 2 retired judges. One of them had served as her mentor. She didn't hesitate. That evening, as the courthouse emptied, a woman in her 70s approached her on the courthouse steps. Brown coat, gray curls, steady eyes. She whispered, I watched you take that bench with your head high. I want you to know, my daughter couldn't do that. They broke her before she had the chance. But you? You held the line. Amara's voice caught in her throat. Thank you, she managed. The woman smiled. No, child, thank you. That night, back at home, Amara sat at her kitchen table. She laid the sealed DOJ file open again. Names, incidents, memos. She added her own, not just as a judge, as a woman, as a target, as a witness. She was no longer just holding the gavel. She had become the record, Amara hadn't even finished her morning tea when the first call came in. "Judge LeRoux," her clerk said, voice tight, "you've been summoned to chambers. The chief judge wants to see you now." She didn't ask which one. There was only one person in that courthouse with the power and the gall to try to check her now. Chief Judge Harold Camden, white, 63, Harvard tie, known for never raising his voice, but always raising a brow. The kind of man who said decorum like it was a threat. Amara arrived at his chambers with her spine straight and her hands empty. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. Camden didn't rise when she entered. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, which looked more like a private library than a place of work. "Have a seat, Judge LeRoux." "I'd rather stand," she said calmly. He sighed. "Suit yourself." A beat passed. Then two. Finally he spoke. "You've drawn a lot of attention. I've enforced the law. You've stirred up media, protesters, external reviews, federal oversight." Amara folded her arms. "Is that your concern, or is it that a black woman sat on a bench and refused to disappear?" Camden's eyes flickered, just once, but it was there. "You're young in your appointment, Judge LeRoux," he said, tone icy. "You'd do well to remember the difference between impact and integrity." "No," Amara replied. "You'd do well to remember that sometimes they're the same thing." Camden sat back. "You're walking a fine line. Public opinion is volatile, and there are people, powerful people, who think you've compromised this court's neutrality." "I was assaulted in my own courthouse," she said evenly, "by someone your silence helped protect." "I didn't protect Carver." "You didn't stop him." That hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. He stood finally, walked to the window. "There's talk," he said, back turned, "of reassignment, censure, even suspension." "Let them talk. You think the DOJ will save you?" Amara smiled. "No, I think the truth will." That afternoon the courthouse lawn overflowed, not with protest, with press. A microphone was shoved in her face the second she stepped outside. "Judge LeRoux, do you believe the court is retaliating against you?" She didn't answer. Not yet. Because now wasn't the time for declarations. It was time for war. The whispers began before she even re-entered the courtroom. "She's pushing too far. She's making it political. She's too angry to be objective." None of them said it out loud, but Amara heard them anyway. It was in the way they shuffled when she passed, in the clipped greetings, the way defense counsel suddenly double-checked everything with the chief judge's office instead of her clerk. The chill didn't come from the air vents. It came from the old walls trying to close back in. But she'd already broken them once. Let them freeze, she thought. I'll still burn. The next session began with a surprise. "The court calls Megan Torres," the clerk read. Gasps fluttered. Amara's eyes widened. Megan, her former intern, the girl who had watched the shaving, the girl who'd apologized in a whisper, the one who had promised, "If you need me to testify, I will." And here she was, tiny, trembling, but standing. She took the oath, cleared her throat. "I saw it," she said, "what they did to her." Her voice shook but didn't break. "I was on duty that morning. They didn't check her ID. They didn't follow procedure. They took her into that room like she was dangerous. But she didn't raise her voice. She didn't move. She just stood there. Amara didn't move either. Didn't even breathe. They laughed," Megan said, quieter now. "When they shaved her hair, one of them said, 'Now you look proper.'" The gallery fell dead silent. The defense objected, citing emotional manipulation. Amara overruled it before they could finish. Megan looked at her only once as she stepped down, and in that look was the exact opposite of silence. Later that afternoon, the backlash escalated. An unsigned editorial was published in the Savannah Chronicle. Judges must be impartial. When justice becomes personal, it risks becoming vengeance. Judge LeRoux's ongoing campaign from the bench undermines not only the decorum of the courtroom, but the very stability of the institution. The word campaign stung most of all. They were painting her courage as ambition, her truth as threat. But the truth, it needed their approval. It already had the people. By the end of the week, over 40 individuals had come forward. Former court staffers, janitors, interns, even retired officers. Their statements formed a tapestry of silent suffering, long buried under standard procedure. A young man named Deshaun Bell submitted a sworn affidavit. I was 16 when they pulled me into that same room. Carver said I looked like I was carrying. I was holding my sat books. They made me strip to my boxers. Another statement from an older white secretary read, "We all knew, we just didn't think anything could be done. I regret that more than anything in my life." But the system was not done retaliating. On a rainy Thursday morning, Amara received formal notification of a judicial censure hearing filed by a committee of 3 judges, all white, all male, all previously close to Hale and Camden. The charge: conduct unbecoming a judicial officer, disruption of institutional process, media contamination of open proceedings. She read the letter twice, then fed it to the shredder without flinching. That same day she received another message. A manila envelope, no return address. Inside, a printed copy of her personnel file and a single typed sentence taped over the front. "We can find your soft spots too." No signature, no name, just right. She showed it to the DOJ agent the next morning. He didn't flinch either. "You're rattling someone," he said. "Good," she answered. "Let them shake." The next court session, the gallery was standing room only. This time Amara wore no robe. She stood before them not as Your Honor, but as a witness. "To everyone here," she began, "this isn't just a courtroom anymore. This is a mirror. And some of you don't like what you see. That's fine. Truth is ugly before it becomes light." She turned her gaze directly to Camden, now seated stiffly in the far right row. "I didn't come here to make history. I came here to do my job. But when the law fails to protect those who uphold it, we don't need to be quiet. We need to be louder." She paused, then tapped her gavel once. "Proceed." That night she went home exhausted, but not broken. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by transcripts, affidavits, and unsigned letters. She had lost track of time, of day, of fear. Then came a knock. Not a knock of threat, a knock of solidarity. When she opened the door, Reverend Elijah stood there. In his hands, a single candle. Behind him, over 200 people. Candles, silence. No chants, no signs, just presence. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. They were holding the line with her. That was the night Amara stopped calling it a case and started calling it what it was. A reckoning. The hearing wasn't held in the usual courtroom. It was moved, intentionally, to Chambers Hall, a smaller, colder space in the basement of the courthouse. No windows, no gallery, just a long table, 3 judges, and a single empty chair across from them. A procedural formality, the memo had said. But Amara knew what it really was. A stage. She arrived alone, no lawyer, no press, just her portfolio and a fire that hadn't gone out in weeks. The door creaked shut behind her. At the center of the panel sat Judge Camden. To his right, Judge Terrence Lake, another relic of the old guard, with a reputation for quiet discipline. On Camden's left, Judge Miriam Stokes, the only woman on the panel, but one who had never once voted against the majority in 2 decades. Amara took her seat. No one spoke for a moment. Then Camden cleared his throat. "Judge LeRoux, this proceeding is to determine whether your conduct in recent weeks has violated the Code of Judicial Ethics and brought disrepute to the federal bench. Amara didn't reply. Captain continued, "You've made inflammatory public statements. You've granted media access to sealed proceedings. You've escalated internal matters into political theater." "Incorrectly," Amara said. Camden blinked. "I've responded to violence with process. I've met silence with testimony. I've opened doors that were welded shut with bureaucracy and cowardice. That's not theater. That's duty." Lake spoke next, voice oily. "Do you deny you've become a figure of controversy?" "I embrace it," Amara said, "because the alternative was invisibility." Stokes shifted in her seat. "You understand that judicial neutrality is the foundation of this court?" "No," Amara said, leaning forward. "I understand that judicial neutrality has been used as a weapon to silence truth, to keep people in line, to make survivors feel like disruptors." She took a breath. "The bench is not neutral when it protects abusers. It's complicit." Camden's jaw flexed. "This is not a trial, Judge LeRoux. This is an inquiry." "No," she said softly. "This is a reckoning." The panel fell quiet. Camden adjusted his cuffs with exaggerated patience. "Judge LeRoux," he said, "this isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about perception, stability, the institution." Amara straightened her shoulders. "Then let me tell you what the institution looks like. From here." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of the sealed complaints, 12 against Carver, 5 against Judge Hale, 3 buried investigations into courthouse harassment, and a redacted memo that bore Camden's own initials. Lake reached for it, but Amara's voice stopped him. "I've already submitted a full copy to the DOJ and 2 Senate offices." Camden's eyes narrowed. "That's a breach of internal confidentiality." "No," she said, "it's called evidence. You should try using it sometime." Stokes exhaled heavily. "Do you want us to suspend you?" Amara looked her dead in the eyes. "Do you think suspension would silence what's already been spoken?" Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown beyond the gates. Live streams showed signs held high. "We protect black women who protect justice. The system is on trial, not her. 12 complaints, 0 action. Who's really unethical?" News anchors outside counted over 4,000 protesters. Across social media, the hashtag trended worldwide. "Stand with Judge LeRoux." And still, inside that room, 3 judges pretended it was just another administrative review. "You are making enemies, Judge LeRoux," Camden warned. She leaned forward. "I'm making records." He banged his pen on the table. "You're destabilizing the authority of this bench." Amara stood slowly. Her voice didn't rise, but the air seemed to lean in. "You want to talk about destabilizing? Let's talk about every victim who filed a complaint and was ignored. Let's talk about the interns who changed majors because of what happened here. Let's talk about the janitors who cleaned blood off the floor after detention's gone too far and were told to stay quiet." Camden's mouth opened. She didn't let him speak. "You want stability? Build it on justice, not fear." 2 days later, the panel issued their ruling. No suspension, no censure, but a strong recommendation for Amara to step away from high-profile civil rights cases. She posted a public response on her official letterhead. "This recommendation implies that accountability should have a volume limit. I reject that premise entirely. I will not recuse myself from injustice just because it's uncomfortable to watch. If you believe silence makes justice neutral, then you misunderstand both." The letter was shared 800,000 times in 24 hours. The next morning, Amara returned to her courtroom. She wore her robe again, not as armor, but as a statement. "I'm still here." The moment she entered, the entire room rose, not out of tradition, but out of belief. This time, no one looked away. By the end of the week, 3 other judges had requested ethics reviews of past cases. 1 retired early. A 4th, Judge Mahoney, was subpoenaed by the DOJ for obstruction of justice. The investigation had become national, but it didn't stop there. The House Judiciary Committee had called for a federal hearing on systemic misconduct in district courts across the South. And at the center of it all was Amara LeRoux, not for what had been done to her, but for what she had done with it. Late that Friday, as the courtroom emptied, her clerk brought in a box. "Mail," the clerk said, "mostly letters." Amara opened the first one. "I used to think judges didn't look like me. Now I know they can. My daughter wants to be one. She's 9. Thank you." Another read. "I was in that courthouse in 2009. I never told anyone what happened. Until now. You gave me my voice back." Another. "Your Honor, they tried to cut you down, and you stood taller. That's justice." Amara placed the letters gently in her drawer. They weren't trophies. They were testimony. That night she stood on her porch, wind stirring the hem of her robe. She didn't feel victorious. She felt responsible, because it wasn't over. Not yet. Not even close. But the bench would never be silent again. The email came from the Office of Congressional Oversight. Subject: formal invitation to testify, House Judiciary Committee hearing on judicial accountability. Amara stared at it for a long time before she moved. This was it. Her story, no longer confined to one courthouse, one city. Now it would echo beneath the vaulted ceilings of Capitol Hill. She was going to Washington. The committee chamber was colder than she expected. Not the air, the eyes. Rows of lawmakers sat elevated in dark wood chairs, polished brass microphones in front of them. Behind Amara, press, clerks, advocates, a gallery of expectant faces. And somewhere among them, Camden, sitting 2 rows back. Uninvited, but very much present. The chairwoman tapped the mic. "This hearing is now in session. Our focus today, judicial misconduct, institutional silencing, and systemic accountability." Then she turned to Amara. "Judge LeRoux, thank you for coming." Amara nodded, placed her notes on the desk, and adjusted the mic. "I'm not here today because I wanted to be a symbol," she began. "I'm here because no one else stood up when it mattered." She told them about the morning in the courthouse, about Carver, about the sealed room, the clippers, the silence, about the moment she took the bench, shorn and shaken, but unbowed. She told them everything. When she finished, the chamber was quiet. Then came the questions. Representative Knowles leaned in. "Judge LeRoux, would you consider your actions emotional?" She held his gaze. "Would you consider silence logical?" He shifted. "We just want to ensure objectivity." "I was violated," she said calmly. "Then I enforced the law. The only thing I compromised was their expectation that I'd stay quiet." Another congressman tried to suggest she had weaponized public sentiment. She smiled slightly. Justice should be felt, otherwise it's just theater. But the most important exchange came from a woman near the end of the dais. A Latina congresswoman from Arizona. She asked no questions, only said, "For the record, I believe you." Amara didn't respond. She didn't need to, because for the first time in months, she felt something shift. There wasn't anger or tension or fear. It was validation. Official. On the record. The hearing recessed at noon. Amara stepped outside the chamber, blazer damp at the collar, hands cold despite the heat of the spotlight. Reporters swarmed, microphones pushed forward. "Judge LeRoux, will you push for impeachment of the judges who covered it up? Is the DOJ working with you directly? Do you still feel safe on the bench?" She answered none of them, because something else was pressing on her. Not the questions, not the noise. A feeling. Something's wrong. She returned to her hotel room, pulled the curtains shut, and powered on her tablet. The inbox was full, requests from law schools, civil rights orgs, 3 major networks, and one email that froze her breath, sent from her clerk's address. Subject: draft, statement of resignation. She clicked it open. Inside, a file, not addressed to her, addressed to Chief Judge Camden. She opened the attachment. I'm deeply conflicted by the media attention and the tone of Judge LeRoux's public responses. I worry that the institution has become secondary to the individual. I write this not out of malice, but out of fear, that we are stepping beyond justice and into performance. Her name was at the bottom. Type, date, never sent, but drafted. Amara stared at the screen for a long time, then closed the file. That evening her phone buzzed, a familiar number. Her clerk, she answered quietly. Hey, a pause. Then, you saw it. Yeah, I didn't send it. I know. I wrote it. In a moment, I was scared, everything felt too big. Amara didn't speak. I didn't send it, the clerk repeated. Amara's voice was low. But you thought about it. I'm sorry. She nodded slowly, though no one could see it. Go home for the weekend, she said. Clear your head. The line went quiet. Are you firing me? No, Amara replied. I'm letting you choose. Look, 3 days later, the House Judiciary Committee released its preliminary recommendation. Systemic failures in courthouse oversight require mandatory reform at the federal level. We recommend all complaints against judicial staff be removed from internal review and placed under DOJ jurisdiction. We commend Judge Amara LeRoux for exemplifying judicial integrity under extraordinary circumstances. The decision went viral, but not everyone celebrated. A day later, someone leaked an internal memo. Investigate potential breaches of professional conduct in LeRoux's courtroom. The source? Anonymous. The content? Vague. But the message was clear. They weren't done. Meanwhile, Savannah changed. Slowly, visibly, the courthouse replaced its entire security team. The screening room was gutted and renovated into a witness prep lounge. 12 dismissed complaints were reinstated. A plaque was mounted just outside Amara's courtroom door. This bench does not bend to silence. But Amara herself, she wasn't celebrating, because now she had to be more careful, not just of men like Carver, but of friends who might flinch when the air got too thick. She stood at her window that evening, looking down at the courthouse from her apartment 3 blocks away. Rain tapped gently against the glass. In her hand, a letter from a woman in Ohio. My daughter watched you on TV. She asked if the law is supposed to hurt people like us. I said no. Then she asked, then why does it? I didn't have an answer, but you gave me hope that someday maybe I will. Amara folded the letter, filed it with the others. There were now over 100. She didn't need them for validation. She needed them as reminders why she couldn't stop now. That night, she turned off the lights, locked her front door, and placed the small recording device under her desk drawer, just in case. Because the system had learned how to look at her in public. But she knew it hadn't stopped watching in the dark. The text came just before sunrise. We need to talk. Not here. It was from her former clerk. Amara read it twice before replying. Where? 3 dots. Then, the fountain at Forsyth, 6 a.m., come alone. The city was still damp from a late spring storm. Spanish moss hung low over the sidewalks, heavy with mist. Amara walked slowly, no coat, just a scarf around her neck and the ache of tired hope sitting in her chest. The fountain bubbled softly in the morning haze. Her former clerk, Rayev, was already there, dressed in jeans and a navy windbreaker. She looked younger than Amara remembered, or maybe just more exposed. Ray didn't speak immediately. Neither did Amara. Finally, why now? Rhea shifted. Because you deserve to hear it from me before they release it. Release what? Rhea reached into her bag and pulled out a single folded page. Printed, highlighted, dated. Email correspondence. Internal Affairs, DOJ. Standard Camden's office. Asikum. Subject, potential breach, LeRoux's clerk. Confirms access to confidential files. Provided background on sealed complaints, including ones unrelated to LeRoux's. Source claims to be distressed by LeRoux's judgment. Investigate relationship. Amara's fingers stiffened. You? Rhea didn't deny it. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I was protecting the court. I didn't know how else to manage it. They told me it would just be background. Who's they? Rhea hesitated. Camden, and, she swallowed, someone from your old chambers, Judge Hale's aide. Amara closed her eyes. The cold wasn't from the fog anymore. You leak seal complaints. Only the ones I thought weren't relevant. Amara looked at her. Really looked. And you don't get to choose what trauma matters. They sat in silence. Finally, Amara said, Why'd you ask to meet me here? Rhea's voice cracked. Because I want to testify, to clear it, on record, everything, including what I did. Amara didn't answer immediately. You can't undo the damage, she said, but you can choose what side of it you stand on now. Rhea nodded, tears welling. I didn't mean to betray you. Amara stood slowly. I know. She walked away without looking back. Not out of anger, out of mourning, because betrayal never comes from across the battlefield. It comes from beside you. Ray's confession rippled outward faster than Amara could contain it. By midday, 3 blogs had picked up the leak. By nightfall, a full expose aired on national news. LeRoux's closest aide quietly fed sealed court information to high-level judicial allies, now seeking to flip the narrative around the Savannah scandal. They called it a double betrayal, once by the system, again by her own. Camden refused comment. But not for long. The next morning, Amara was summoned to an emergency session. This time, it wasn't about discipline. It was a setup. They framed it as a clarification proceeding. But the real goal was clear. Undermine her, publicly, before the reform bills reach Congress. She walked into the chamber to find a full panel of district judges, including some who hadn't shown their faces in weeks. Cameras were allowed. Microphones were hot. And right there, 2 rows back, Rhea sat, stone-faced with Camden's aide beside her. So that's how it was. Camden opened the session with a rehearsed tone. In light of recent developments, we must determine whether Judge LeRoux's staff's conduct compromises her courtroom decisions. This is not an indictment, but a matter of procedural integrity. Amara didn't wait. Then let's be clear on the record, she said. A staff member, without my authorization, shared information. When I found out, I didn't bury it. I brought it forward. She looked straight at Rhea. The breach happened behind my back. The transparency began with me. One of the judges scoffed. Still, the perception of influence. Amara raised her voice, not loud, but firm, controlled. Perception doesn't override fact, but you don't want truth. You want quiet. She paused. Well, I'm not here to offer that. The air in the room shifted. Reporters whispered furiously. Rhea looked down. And for a moment the silence was louder than the gavel. That night her inbox filled again. Some scathing, some supportive, but one stood out. From the DOJ official she'd worked with since the beginning. Subject, FYI, Camden's been calling Washington. Inside the message was a forwarded internal memo. Camden suggests Judge LeRoux's rising platform poses a national threat to judicial cohesion. Recommends private intervention before reform vote. They weren't just trying to discredit her. They were trying to shut her down before the system changed for real. She took a long walk that night, past the courthouse, past the press barricades, to a small bookstore 2 blocks from her childhood bus stop, the same store her mother used to take her to after church. She picked a copy of The Fire Next Time off the shelf and sat with it at the back. She didn't cry, but she read Baldwin's words like scripture. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. 2 days later, Raya reappeared. This time in front of the press. She stood outside the courthouse. No lawyers, no handlers. Just a mic. I betrayed someone who trusted me, she began. I did it out of fear. Fear of what power does when it's cornered. I let that fear make me a tool. I pause. I am not asking for forgiveness. I'm offering my name on the record. Because what Judge LeRoux stands for is bigger than my failure. And this courthouse deserves better than silence. She walked away. Didn't take questions. Didn't run. The next morning, Amara entered the courtroom like she always had. But this time, the gallery rose before the clerk called them. Not out of obligation, out of recognition. Her voice didn't tremble. Call your first witness, she said. And the system battered, but not broken. Listen. That evening she met with the DOJ. They handed her a sealed packet, heavy, top page stamped. Draft. Federal Policy. And Judicial Oversight Act. LeRoux's Provisions. She smiled faintly. No pride, just purpose. In her chambers, she lit a small candle. Not for herself, for every voice that had been quiet, including Raya's, because even betrayal, when named out loud, could be part of the healing. And because she knew, the real enemy wasn't those who broke under pressure. It was those who built the pressure to begin with. The headline dropped at 6:14 a.m. Federal Judge Amara LeRoux faces impeachment inquiry. Sources say ethics violations may trigger historic removal vote. No byline, no citation, just shadowy sources familiar with the matter. Within an hour it was on CNN, Fox, MSNBC. By lunch, pundits were calling her divisive, radical, even a destabilizer in robes. Camden didn't need to speak this time. The machine was speaking for him. In her chambers, Amara sat in silence. Not shock. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. A voice answered, crisp, female, familiar. Madison Lee. Amara didn't pause. I need you. The voice smiled. I was wondering how long it would take. Madison Lee had been a litigator, then a law professor, then a constitutional defense strategist. She once beat the FBI in open court. She arrived in Savannah that evening with a single briefcase and zero time for small talk. Here's what they're doing, she said, pulling up her tablet. They're not trying to prove you broke ethics. They're trying to exhaust you, make you radioactive. By the time the reform vote hits the floor, you'll be too bruised to influence it. So what do? Madison grinned. We go legal and loud. They held a press conference on the courthouse steps the next day. Not for apology, for declaration. Amara stepped up to the mic. I am not a symbol, she said. I am not a movement. I am a federal judge upholding the law, and the fact that it makes some people uncomfortable does not make it unethical. She turned to face the cameras directly. If this system wants to go on record, trying to remove a black woman for exposing the truth, it better be ready to explain itself. The effect was immediate. Clips of her statement hit social media before the microphones even cooled. Civil rights lawyers from D.C. to Oakland reshared it. Law students stitched their own commentaries to it. One video simply captioned, she said, "Explain yourself." It racked up 4 million views overnight. But the fight had only begun. That evening, Madison laid out their response plan. Step 1, federal motion to compel transparency. We're going to file for discovery, Madison said, fingers flying over the keyboard. Force Chamden's office to release all internal correspondence related to your impeachment inquiry. They want to play politics. We give them subpoenas. Step 2, create public legal clarity. Madison called it the People's Docket, a website updated daily with legal breakdowns of what was happening behind the scenes. Amara's team published redacted versions of her rulings, citations, ethics notes, all public, all legal. They weren't hiding. They were documenting. Then came step 3, expose the network. 1 week later, Madison handed Amara a thin file. Inside, emails. Camden Hale, a national legal pack. Subject lines. Keep her in the spotlight until she burns. Yeah, we don't need to win the facts, just the fatigue. And most damning of all, media pressure works. We've done it before. Amara stared at the words. They weren't trying to defeat her. They were trying to make the public tired of her. But it backfired. Because the People's Docket didn't wear out. It caught fire. Students at Howard launched Read the Record. On October 24th, professors at Columbia taught an emergency seminar on her rulings. And in Savannah, the courthouse steps became a daily teach-in. One evening, a group of local pastors stood outside the courthouse with candles. Not for prayer, for precedent. We are not here, Reverend Dorsey said, to defend a person. We are here to defend a principle, that truth, when spoken, is not a disqualification. Then came the congressional subpoena. But it wasn't for Amara. It was for Camden and Judge Hale. The DOJ had launched an official obstruction probe. Camden denied knowledge, but emails didn't lie, and now neither could he. On a rainy Thursday morning, Amara entered the chamber not as the target, but as the catalyst. The Judiciary Committee met again. Only this time the opening line was different. We owe Judge LeRoux an apology, said Representative Salas. But we owe this country something more, a reckoning with the way we silence truth in the name of order. Amara didn't smile, but she did speak. I'm not here for apology, she said. I'm here to remind you, the law was never meant to be safe. It was meant to be just. By the end of that week, the impeachment inquiry was dropped. Camden was placed on administrative leave. Hale's legacy was revoked from 3 court-funded programs. And most stunning of all, Amara was invited to help draft the National Ethics Reform Bill. That night, she sat in her chambers again, alone, not with fear this time, but with fire. She opened the draft title of the bill, the LeRoux Judicial Integrity Act, and beneath it, her handwritten note, in ink, not a symbol, a sword. For those who come next, the first letter came in a plain white envelope. No return address, no salutation. Just a single line typed on stiff paper. I was 14. He slammed me against the wall outside courtroom 3B. Inside the envelope was a yearbook photo. The boy was smiling. There was a date scribbled on the back, 2007. Amara stared at it for a long time. Then she opened the next envelope. Then the next. By the end of the week, her desk was buried in over 200 personal testimonies. Most handwritten, some typed, a few shaky with age, others no longer legible, but real. Stories of humiliation, of being searched, stripped, ignored, denied. All by the same pattern. All outside the official record. Madison stood beside the desk, silent. We can't take this to trial, she said. We're not. Because this isn't one case, this is the case, a class action. If we do this, it's not just against one man anymore, it's against an institution. Amara didn't hesitate. Then let's name it what it is. The lawsuit was filed the next morning. Bryant et al. v. the District Court of Savannah and related personnel, class action suit on behalf of all individuals subjected to unconstitutional treatment by courthouse law enforcement between 2003 and 2021. The named defendants: Deputy Blake Carver, Chief Judge Chamden, Judge Hale, deceased, the City of Savannah Legal Oversight Board. The filing alone made national headlines, but the announcement that the testimony phase would be public and televised, that sent shockwaves. Suddenly, people who had never watched C-SPAN tuned in with popcorn and notebooks. Old protesters, law students, teachers, people who had stopped believing in justice a long time ago, now watching to see if justice could still speak in their name. Amara stood behind the podium that morning, not as a presiding judge, but as a legal advocate. Her robe was folded behind her. She wasn't carrying power today. She was carrying memory. The first witness was Louis Bryant. Begin. But this time he wasn't testifying for himself. He walked to the front of the hearing room, holding a faded Polaroid in his hand. "My brother," he said, voice low but steady. "They dragged him out of this courthouse in '85. Never charged, never seen again in court. We buried him 6 years later. Not from bullets, from silence." No one interrupted. Not this time. The second was a young woman named Danielle Toussaint. She stood small but unshaking. "I came here at 16 to give testimony in a harassment case, but they detained me, said I looked like I was hiding something. They took me into a side room, made me lift my shirt. I was a child." She held up the file she'd carried with her for 12 years. A file stamped "Complaint Dismissed" in red ink. The stories kept coming. A custodian who watched Carver push a black law student into a broom closet and call it a random search. A deaf man misidentified as uncooperative. A former military veteran whose PTSD was mocked at the metal detector. They didn't cry for pity. They spoke for record. Each time a new name was read, the gallery rose. Not in applause, but in recognition, in restoration, in reversal. The final witness of the day was Reverend Elijah Dorsey. He walked with a cane, but his voice cut sharper than any lawyer's. "I came to this building 23 times in 30 years, he said, "and every time I watched this courthouse protect its power instead of its people." He paused, but now he looked over at Amara. Now, for the first time, the bench has ears. That night, Amara returned to her chambers. No staff, no press, just silence, but a different kind of silence. The kind that follows a storm. The kind that meant the air was clearing. Then came the call from D.C. The House Judiciary Subcommittee was scheduling a national broadcast for the final day of testimony. The purpose? To mark a public declaration of acknowledgement, apology, and the formal recognition of a new standard in judicial accountability. They asked if Amara would speak. She didn't write a speech. She didn't need to. When she stood in front of the full chamber, press cameras trained, live captions scrolling, she didn't raise her voice. She just told the truth. "I was not the first woman heard in silence inside a courthouse. I was not the first to be watched, measured, and dismissed. But I may be the last to remain silent about it." She let the words land. "I didn't stand up to be a hero. I stood up because the seat behind that bench was never supposed to be empty, and if no one else would fill it with dignity, I had to." Her voice held. "What you see behind me is not courage. It's the result of what happens when 1,000 silences decide, together, to speak." She looked to the gallery, then into the camera. "Let this day be the last day the system forgets who it is meant to serve." The room didn't erupt in applause. It sat in stillness, a holy kind of silence, the kind that knows history is being carved, not shouted. The next morning, President Elise Warden issued a formal address from the Rose Garden. She held up the same yearbook photo that had started it all. The boy in 2007, still smiling. Never heard. Until now. This country cannot undo silence, but it can choose from this day forward to never mistake it for justice again. Then she signed an executive order, the National Courthouse Equity Mandate, effective immediately. That night, Amara returned home. She took off her shoes, unpinned her hair, and stood barefoot on her porch. She looked up at the stars, not for inspiration, but because they had been there all along, like truth, silent, distant, but always burning. The courthouse was quiet again, not the kind of quiet that once choked. This quiet was different. It felt like breath, like a held note finally released. Amara walked through the marble hall slowly, heels silent against the floor, fingers tracing the edge of her robe for the last time. Today would be her final session, not because she was pushed out, but because she chose. In the days since the National Courthouse Equity Mandate passed, the building itself had changed. The screening rooms were now glass-fronted. Officers wore small body cams, reviewed weekly by an independent board. A portrait of the 12 complainants from the Bryant v. Savannah case hung near the clerk's desk. No plaque, no fanfare. Just faces, real, undeniable. See, Amara stepped into her chambers one last time. Her desk was clear. Only a small envelope remained. Her resignation letter, addressed to the President of the United States. It wasn't a retreat. It was a relay. Her replacement had been confirmed the day before. Judge Alicia Kim, Korean-American, daughter of refugees, former public defender, fierce, quiet, young. The vote had been unanimous. Amara smiled as she pictured her stepping into the robe, not to fill her place, but to continue the work. At 10 o'clock IMM, she entered the courtroom. The gallery stood. She nodded once, tapped her gavel gently. Before we begin this session, she said, I ask your permission to speak not as a judge, but as a witness. The room was still. I witnessed what silence does. I witnessed what fear builds. But I also witnessed what happens when one voice stands and others follow. She looked to the crowd, some familiar, some not, some once silent, now standing. I am leaving the bench, not because I've lost faith in the system, but because I've finally seen it change. Her hand rested on the gavel one last time, and I trust it will keep changing, not because of this seat, but because of who now sits in it. The final case of the day was brief, a tenant rights dispute, small claims, no cameras, no headlines. But Amara listened like it was a constitutional crisis, because the law wasn't sacred in its scale. It was sacred in its application. She ruled fairly, calmly, with care. And when she rose from the bench, the court stood again, not just for tradition, but for what she'd made the robe me. Back in her chambers, she changed slowly, folded the robe herself, tied it with a ribbon, placed it gently in the cedar box that had once belonged to her mother. The same box that had held church programs, voter registration cards, and the obituary of Amara's father, shot by a traffic stop gone wrong in '94. Now it would hold something new, a symbol of power, not untouched, but transformed. Outside, the courthouse steps were empty. By design, no press conference, no parade, just one figure waiting. Judge Alicia Kim. She wore a simple navy suit. Her hands were clasped in front of her, steady. Amara handed her the box. You don't have to be me, she said. Alicia smiled softly. I know. Just be louder, faster, and more dangerous. They laughed and embraced. That night, Amara walked home, alone, but not lonely. She passed a mural being painted on the courthouse wall, still unfinished, still raw, but powerful. It showed 12 faceless figures walking through fire, and one woman behind them. Not leading, but holding the doors open. Weeks passed. The world moved on, but change didn't. One day, Amara visited a local middle school. A teacher had invited her to speak. She almost declined, but curiosity won. The classroom was filled with girls, brown, black, Asian. One wore a t-shirt that read, "Respect is a verb." They asked her questions. Were you scared? How did you know when to speak? Do you still believe in the law? She answered honestly, but the one that stopped her was this. Are you done fighting? Amara paused, then smiled. No, she said, I'm just fighting differently now. On her way out, one girl slipped her a note folded in quarters. He read, I want to be what you made possible. Amara stood there a moment longer, and in that moment she knew the rope had moved, not just from one judge to another, but from an institution to a generation. Later that year, when the Department of Justice held its National Judicial Reform Summit, they invited Amara to close the final session. She declined. Instead, she sent a letter. It was short, just 3 lines. The law is not a weapon, it is a responsibility. The bench is not a stage, it is a promise. Let it never be silent again. They read it aloud, and the room stood, not for applause, but because some words are not meant to be clapped for, only carried.